Now that you've configured Cubase to use your preferred audio interface, it's also important to confirm that you can see all of your MIDI inputs and outputs. Now, if you're like me, you're going to be using a USB keyboard controller that doesn't have its own sounds built in. However, if you have devices that have MIDI in and out or an internal sound generating synthesizer in it, then you'll want to make sure that you can see all of the MIDI connections to that instrument. So let's go to the same place that we used to set up our audio interface, and that's under the Studio menu and under Studio Setup. But then on the left-hand column of this window, you're going to find the MIDI folder and then click on MIDI Port Setup. And when you do, all of your installed input and output devices for MIDI are going to show up in this menu. Now, if you know that you have your MIDI devices connected to your computer, but you're not seeing those devices show up in this window, then you'll want to make sure that you download and install the most current drivers for that particular product. For example, I'm using an Arturia USB controller called the Laboratory. So I can see that it has an input destination and an output destination as well. I could either change the name of that here if I wanted to, or just leave it at the default. I'm just going to leave it at the default setting instead. But then I'll want to make sure that they are both visible. So I'll need to make sure that there's a tick next to the visible setting for each of those devices. And there's one other thing you may want to verify, and that is that your keyboard is set to the In All MIDI Inputs column as on. And that means that anytime you select a MIDI channel and tell it to receive from all the MIDI inputs, your keyboard will be one of those possible inputs. It's also possible that you don't see as many MIDI inputs and outputs as I have here, because I have a whole bunch of individual MIDI controllers hooked up to my computer. So don't worry if you don't see as many options. In fact, depending on the brand and type of MIDI controller that you're using, you may only see one of these options, either as an input or as an output, and that's normal. But more than likely, you're going to want to see something on your MIDI input so that you can record from your MIDI device into Cubase to record MIDI tracks and instrument tracks. So that's the MIDI setup, and next let's talk about creating a Cubase project properly.